Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about some pros and cons of living in the DC metro area. Now just a little intro here. I have lived here in Northern Virginia specifically my entire life. I have never lived in DC proper. However, I feel like I can give a little bit of an insight here because it is not often that you meet people who have lived here their whole life. We'll get into that a little bit as we go down the list here, but first we're going to start with some of the pros. The very first pro is kind of an obvious thing, I think, and that is the cultural and historical significance of living here. You have a lot of access to national monuments, museums, and historic sites, so if history, especially like Civil War era type stuff, or like really any history, because DC is a hub for history. If that's your thing, this is a great place to live. You'll love all of the stuff we have to do here. That we have the Smithsonian here in DC. Specifically, they're free and open to the public. Just a good note for anybody looking to visit. And being surrounded by history and cultural institutions like the National Gallery, the U.S. Capitol, and the National Mall. Those are all great things that we have to offer in this area. It's not just D.C. I would say Northern Virginia, Maryland, even a little bit of Delaware has a lot of history and a lot to offer in terms of that. The second pro to living here is that the public transportation is decent. It could be better, but it's better than a lot of other places. The metro system specifically makes it really easy to get around the city and the suburbs, like Northern Virginia, Maryland areas. The bus service, specifically the metro bus service, and bike sharing programs offer added convenience, especially if you don't drive. It's pretty easy to get around in the DC area. Number 3 is the diversity of people and cultures here. DC and the DMV in general is a very diverse area. Depending on the area you're in, you're going to see, like, at least in Northern Virginia and in Maryland, so it seems, certain suburbs kind of have like their own vibe, if that makes sense. I think that's very common in a lot of other city areas. DC will have like neighborhoods that have their own kind of vibe, their own cultural vibe. But DC compared to like the whole area, that's the weird thing kind of about DC and the DMV in general, is that DC is like kind of the city hub, but then the suburbs aren't even like the same state. So you get a little bit of like state culture along with like a city suburb kind of culture like you would in New York, except New York is a lot bigger. So yeah, DC is known for being very diverse. It's reflected in the food, the festivals, events, pretty much everything around here. My number 4 pro of living here is the career opportunities. Now, I think this is the biggest pro about this area, aside from like the cultural diversity. It's big here on political government. If you're in defense, if you're in the military, if you're in tech, if you're in nonprofit or any international sector, this is going to be a great place to work and live. Compared to a lot of other places, I would say the jobs are rather plentiful here and still pretty competitive depending on what field you're in. So overall, the jobs are pretty plentiful and they pay very well compared to other places in the country. For example, both my sector as a librarian and my husband's sector, this is the number 1 area to live to be paid the most. So I would say he's probably in the top 5% most likely of his field in terms of his pay. And I'm not quite there, but definitely higher than some other places. So the number 5 benefit of living in this area is easy and plentiful access to nature and outdoor activities. I think compared to other urban and suburban areas, we have a lot of green space. It's very much prioritized either by the cities here or the states. You have a lot of proximity to parks, trails, outdoor spaces in general. People are very outdoorsy in the DMV, so kayaking, biking, hiking, picnicking, running is very big. Most of the DMV is very urban, but like I said, the cities are kind of designed in a way that they seem to prioritize green spaces, which is nice. That being said, it is an area of pretty decent expansion all the time, so you will see some areas being developed. It's quite sad to see, in my opinion, but it is very common here. But they do seem to prioritize like parks and things, so it's not like super urban, if that makes sense. Even DC, I would argue, has a lot of green space and a lot of parks and a lot of, third spaces compared to some other cities. Number 6 on my pros list is that there's great food here. Like I said, the DMV in general is very culturally diverse. As a result, you get a lot of different food. I will say you get a lot of food festivals. We get a lot of pop-ups here as well. Pretty much anything you could want, depending, like I said, on the city or neighborhood. Like, for example, the city I live in, I always want to call it a town, but we're not a town. The city I live in, very popular for like Latin American food. So yeah, great food scene here. Definitely recommend that if you're a foodie. Number 7 on my pros list is the neighborhoods in general. I would characterize them as pretty vibrant overall. Like I said, each neighborhood kind of has its unique character and historic and artistic vibe, especially in DC. It's like expanded more in the DMV as a large. There's options for pretty much anybody. If you want to live in an apartment, if you want to live in a single family home, if you want to be surrounded by like your own culture, that's definitely a thing you could do here. So now we can get into some of the cons of living in the DMV. And the number one that is pretty obvious, I think, is the cost of living. Rent is high. Cost of living in general is high. The closer you are to DC, the more expensive things are going to be for you. Overall cost of living is just high here. I would say there is some housing affordability challenges for first-time homebuyers here. So the median price of a single-family home in the DMV as a whole is $675,000, which I think is very inaccessible to first-time homebuyers. So just something to keep in mind if you are interested in living here. Depending on where you're at in your career and your life and stuff, like you may be renting, you may be in a townhome. Townhomes are very popular here, both renting and owning. Many people here, their first home is either a condo or a townhouse. So just keep that in mind. Number 2 on my cons list is the traffic and commuting issues. So DC metro traffic is a nightmare. Rush hour used to be a thing, but it's pretty much all the time now. Like the typical Monday through Friday 9 to 5 doesn't exist, as we know. And as a result, rush hours all the time. Based on my research, it said the average commute is around 30 minutes, but I would gather it's probably closer to an hour. Very common that people commute an hour or more when considering traffic. And if you're going into DC or not for work, which a lot of people do, there's very limited parking in some areas. Sometimes, depending on where you live, how close you are to a metro station, and how far you're commuting, it doesn't make sense to own a car. The metro, even the trains, are very crowded during peak hours. Just something to keep in mind. I both love and hate the metro. If you've ever been to DC or you live here, you know that they make you super motion sick. At least me. Some other people might be immune to this, but it doesn't seem, and I'm not very easily made motion sick, okay? Every time I ride the metro, I get nauseous and want to throw up. So I think it's just the way they operate. Like they brake real hard and then they gas it real hard. And it's just like the way the trains work. So number 3 on my cons list is the weather in general. We are, at least in Northern Virginia, I think DC technically is considered it too, but we are technically the South. Virginia in particular, like the DC area, gets very hot and humid in the summer. Like really humid. Winter is usually pretty cold and wet. So we do sometimes get snow. It's not always a ton of snow. We usually get a lot of ice. And it sucks. And going hand in hand with the weather is that people here, because people move from all over the place, they can't drive in the weather. So traffic gets worse. There's accidents all the time. It's just horrible. We have had some air quality issues. This is kind of in recent 5 years or so, both with the pollution and pollen and stuff like in the spring and summer. The high humidity doesn't help with that. But also recently we've had wildfires here in Virginia, which have contributed to some air issues in the summertime. Now, number 4 on my list is the noise and crowds in general, especially downtown. It's very noisy, busy, street traffic, construction, crowds of tourists, especially in the summer. Yeah, popular areas like the National Mall, museums can be really crowded. And if you're visiting to figure out if you want to live here, I would recommend coming in the wintertime because there's way less people downtown, especially like the touristy areas. If you prefer a quieter, slower lifestyle, this place is probably not going to be for you because the hustle culture here is crazy and people are just busy all the time. Number 5 on my cons list is the limited space, expensive housing. We kind of went into this a little bit. A lot of people can't afford to live where they work here. I think that's pretty true of most urban areas, most cities in the United States. But more and more people are being pushed further and further from DC. Because the wages, unfortunately, are not really keeping up with the cost of living here. So, like I said, a lot of people commute an hour or more to work if they work in the city, and it's very common for, like, at least in Virginia, like someone to work in DC, or like close to DC, but to like live like in Fauquier County. It's just kind of the way it is, and it's not for everybody. And personally, I hate it. Number 6 on my list of cons is the very limited nightlife. So you get a little bit of it in DC, but I would say it's still kind of not a big thing here. So if you're big into like clubs and stuff, it's not going to be like a big thing that a lot of people do. Just something to keep in mind. Bars are pretty plentiful around here, but clubs, nightclubs, not so much. They're pretty much exclusively, there's probably some in Maryland, but because the vibe up there is a little different, but like in Northern Virginia, there's like none. Number 7 on my cons list is the political climate in general and dealing with like the politics here. This is the big thing, I think, that I personally don't like about living here. So like as the political hub of the US, DC is kind of the epicenter with like, I don't really care about protests so much except for like, we had one a couple years ago where people were like blocking 495, blocking the Beltway, which like, okay, but like, good luck, you're gonna get run over because people are crazy. So yeah, the protests, not always disruptive. Like we did have some stuff, with like the Trump election and stuff where like some looting, breaking windows, that type of thing. It's just kind of expected. Like I think regardless at this point of at least this year, right? In the year of 2024, prior to the like election leading up to it, they boarded things up, and it was kind of like this mentality of like it didn't really matter who won because either way people were probably going to freak out and break things. Because the thing to keep in mind about the DMV is like there's a lot of rather wealthy people here, and that kind of goes hand in hand with like being right wing. So you'd think this place being so diverse would be super liberal, but it's kind of in the middle. To be honest with you, there's like kind of 50-50 of both sides here. And it just kind of is that way. I will say that, but not everybody here is right leaning. So there's that. But tensions in general during political seasons are really like charged. They create a very charged atmosphere. Everybody is kind of feeling it. You think you're feeling it when you live somewhere else during the election, but amplify that by about 400% living in DC. And I think it comes down to here, a lot of people's livelihoods depend on the outcome of an election. So there's this extra like, because people work in politics, they work in defense, they work in whatever, like no matter what field you're in here, somehow the election is going to impact your like means of survival. So I think it adds a level of tension. There's also the fact that what is normally considered national news by a lot of people's standards is kind of local news for us. So not only does like big national news break first here usually, there's kind of this constant current regarding staying informed and like discussing current events as like small talk, which can be exhausting. Number 8 on my list of cons of living in the area is the overall high competition for jobs and housing. Not only is it expensive to find a house or an apartment here, but it's very competitive and it can be difficult. The job market, while full of opportunities, is still really competitive. I really hope this is still recording. My mic died, so we're just going to continue with the in-camera audio, I am so sorry in advance for how bad it's going to sound. But I don't know where I was and when this decided to quit. So like I was saying, overall, the competition for jobs and housing is pretty high here. While we do have a lot of jobs compared to other places, like DC has been fairly recession-proof, knock on wood. We felt it a little bit in recent years, but it didn't hit us as bad as it could have at first, especially like during the pandemic. The jobs here are still pretty competitive. I don't feel like you can escape that so much. And I think it's because a lot of people are trying to move from other areas for a better job. So you're like competing with people from all over the place. It's not just locals. Yeah, like I was saying, a lot of people are just trying to settle from other areas, and that can kind of make it more difficult to find a house, an apartment. And lastly, on my list of cons here is that there can be some difficulty making friends here. Now, this is kind of two-part. The culture, like I said here, the hustle culture here is real. It's very real. I think a lot of people are not super interested in dating as well. We were apparently voted the most lonely city in the United States, and there's more single people here than there are other places. My research here says that nearly half of households are single people, and while the dating pool is wide, people are very insular and private. And I think that's kind of due to having to work so much to make ends meet, but also perhaps the sectors that people are working in. People don't share a whole lot. They're usually very private. It has to do with people having a lot of clearances and stuff around here. But in general, I will say the vibe is kind of like, I would say people are friendly, but not warm, if that makes sense. So it's a very interesting vibe here in the DMV. I think having a lot of different cultures too can make it kind of difficult. People don't really understand each other as well as they could because of that, and it leads to a lot of misunderstandings or kind of like cultural divides here. I think the last thing that contributes to this difficulty in making connections with people is the fact that a lot of people, I would say the vast majority of them, move away from the DMV in 5 to 7 years. So even if you make friends, they're probably gonna move away at some point. It is very uncommon that people stay here long term and put roots down. Most people come, they take advantage of the area and the jobs and the like prestigious title, and then they move somewhere that they would rather be. Either to somewhere that has a better city, like vibe for them, they move for their job. Because again, a lot of people move here for their jobs to begin with. Their jobs move them here, and then they move away. That's kind of the way things go, and it is what it is. I would say a lot of my lasting friendships here were people I went to high school with, but a lot of people that I went to high school with have moved away. A lot of them did not stay here. I'm surprised I did. The longer you're here, and really, like, it's not that I wouldn't want to move. It's just that the longer you're here, the more stuck you become, basically, is the best way I can put it. You earn more, but things cost more. You kind of end up stuck here for one reason or another. Both me and my husband personally, this is just like a little insight here, is that, you know, our careers finally started to take off here, and we're just kind of stuck here until we probably retire, realistically. It's more complicated than our jobs. It's like our living situations, so we're kind of stuck in the house we're in because of the housing market across the entire country. So yeah, but for one reason or another, people rarely stay. Like, they rarely stay more than 7 years. And they usually, like, move back to where their family is or whatever. People come in, like, their 20s, establish a career, and then move back home, settle down, have roots, have kids, that kind of thing. But yeah, these are just my insights as a local. And like I said, kind of take it with a grain of salt. Not everybody's experience here is going to be the same. And some people may have a better opinion of certain things, or certain things may bother people more than they bother me. You know, everybody's different. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And as always, consider subscribing if you'd like to see more from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye. Shut it.